Dr. Twenge, welcome to 12 Geniuses.
Thank you.
I'm excited to have this conversation. You're an author and you've written a new book, 10 Rules for Raising Kids in a High-Tech World. In what ways is technology harming students and our youngest adults?
Well, there's a lot of things going on. My research is mostly focused on the mental health effects, particularly anxiety and depression. So, for example, we know that the more hours a day a teen spends using social media, the more likely it is that they'll be anxious or depressed.
And when did this start? Is this something that has tracked along with social media usage?
Yeah, I mean, that's the other piece of it. And that's how I came to be interested in the effects of technology in the first place is I research generational differences and work with these big surveys of teens that have been done since the 1970s. And in the data around 2012, I started to see big changes. More and more teens started to say they felt left out, they felt lonely, they felt like they couldn't do anything right, that their life wasn't useful. And those last two are all classic symptoms of depression. And sure enough, depression doubled among teens between 2011 and 2019 before the pandemic and right at the time that social media and smartphones became really common.
Now, when you say depression doubled, are you talking went from 4% of young people to 8%, or are we talking bigger numbers than that?
In the book, the graph I have is broken down by gender. So for girls, for example, clinical level depression among girls 12 to 17 used to be pretty steady at about 12%. And by 2019, it had doubled to about 24%. So those are pretty big numbers.
That's a quarter of all girls.
Yes,
And these are
exactly.
teenage girls, you said?
Yeah, 12 to 17.
Oh my. Well, when I saw the title of your book, Raising Kids in a High-Tech World, my mind immediately went to social media and to mobile technologies. But you don't limit it to that, and I think you've extended it to porn and to video games as well. What's harming people more? Is it social media? Is it pornography? Is it video games?
It's really hard to say. I did do one analysis that did more of a head-to-head comparison between time spent on social media and time spent on gaming, and time spent on social media was more strongly linked to depression for both girls and boys than gaming was. For pornography, I haven't studied that myself as much, but what I want parents to know is something that I'm embarrassed to say I didn't realize until about a year and a half ago, which is just how incredibly easy it is for kids to see even hardcore pornography online. There's no age verification, there's nothing stopping them except for one little button that says, I am 18, enter. That's it. So if you don't have parental controls and web filtering, your kids can look at pornography that easily, or they may even stumble across it accidentally. I think we all have to be, more aware of that because I think it just isn't publicized enough, how easy that is, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think the stumbling upon it happens probably a little bit more than people might realize. You could have
Mhm.
a Google search, for example, that is adjacent to something sexual and then be fed some content. I've heard stories of kids 10, 12, 14 years old having that sort of experience.
Exactly. I think we have to put this in the context of, I think there's often the assumption of like, oh, but my kids are good. I have a good kid. They're not going to do this. Well, they may stumble across it accidentally. And even good kids are curious, and kids at a certain age are curious about that. And you do not want them learning those things from hardcore pornography or pornography, period. Yes, you want them to learn about sexuality, but not in that environment and not online without you being there to help them understand the ins and outs of these things.
When I saw these three categories, social media, video games, and porn, I thought girls, boys, and boys. But I'm assuming that that's probably too simplistic. What are your thoughts in terms of the gender makeup of these groups?
Well, it is true that girls spend more time on social media than boys do, and boys spend more time on gaming than girls do, and that boys are, a little more attracted to finding pornography because it tends to be made more for boys and men. But these are things that cut across genders. There are girls who are spending way too much time gaming, just like there are boys who do that. Same thing with boys in social media. So um, I think you have to be aware of all of them. I have 3 girls myself, so social media is a little bit more front of mind. But I've talked to a lot of parents around the country. Certainly have lots of friends who have boys, and all 3 of these are an issue.
Mhm. When you think about brain development, when a teenager is hooked on one of these technologies, regardless of what it is, what is happening to their brain development?
So we don't really know yet, and I have to put this in context that I'm not a neuroscientist, but there are a few studies, and the studies, point in the direction basically that the social media lights up the dopamine pathway in the way that pleasurable things generally do. And what that means is it becomes a compulsion or addiction fairly quickly. So
Mhm,
that's one of the many dangers is that it's really hard, even for adults, to put down that phone and stop watching TikTok or stop looking at Instagram. And it's very, very difficult for children and teens because they don't have the self control that an adult does. And teens are going to look longer at things that are a little out of the ordinary or disturbing or sexual. And what those apps do is then they feed them more content like that. Anything on, like, let's say TikTok that you look at for longer, that's how the algorithm works. It feeds you more of what you spent more time on.
mhm.
And so teens can end up, with a very disturbing looking feed because that's what they're looking longer at. And it's within these feeds are very individualized too. So I think it's hard for some adults to realize that kids' feeds are gonna look very different. So maybe you watch cooking videos and that's all you watch on TikTok. Well, that's not what your teenager's feed is gonna look like.
When you say that we can get hooked on, let's say, Instagram or on TikTok or even on YouTube fairly quickly, what are you talking here? Are you talking over the course of days or weeks? What sort of time period are you talking about?
Well, it depends, but these algorithms are really powerful. The companies have poured billions into them, and pretty quickly it will figure out what you wanna see.
How much time are teens spending on these sites?
A lot. So Gallup found last year that the average teen in the US spends almost 5 hours a day using social media,
Average teen.
and that's average. Right? So there are some who are spending 9 hours a day. Is not actually that usual. That's not like 1%. That's more like depending on the group we're talking about. If it's girls of a certain age, it can be up to 15 or 20% who are spending that much time. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's like a full-time job.
So what are they doing during that time? Just consuming videos, consuming posts? Are they really engaging or what what does that activity look like?
Yeah. So sometimes it can be posting or, making videos or things like that. But most of those surveys, when they're focused on, time spent on social media, it's generally not the time, making the video or making the post. Most of it is passive consumption. And I think the other thing that is important for parents to know is that only a small proportion of that is communicating with friends. But on TikTok, it's almost zero. Generally they're not communicating with friends there. On Instagram, it might be a little bit, but it's mostly consuming this fire hose of content. And one thing I want to make clear to folks is a lot of parents have said yes to their kids asking for social media because the kids will say, if you do not give me social media, then I will be left out. That's how my friends communicate. But I think that's a huge, huge myth. I've seen that with my own kids and with other parents that I talk to. There are so many other ways for kids to communicate, even electronically. They can text each other, they can call each other, they can use FaceTime, they can see each other in person. It doesn't have to be algorithmic social media. They don't absolutely need that to communicate with each other. It's really not a requirement. And my oldest daughter's 18. She said something that I thought was really insightful recently. She said, "Look, anybody who will not communicate with you because you're not on a particular platform is not actually your friend."
I love her for that and thank her please because that's
Mhm.
brilliant. That really is
Yeah.
truly brilliant. Now, the communication aspect of social media or the lack of communication on social media is different than video games. And you do talk about
Mhm.
one of the upsides of video games is that oftentimes kids are playing and communicating and actually creating community via these video games. I'm assuming you think that's a positive, but is there a downside to that as well?
Well, I mean, it's so it's not all positive, but yes, it's more positive. So, playing a video game with a friend and you're talking to them in real time, that is much less obviously toxic than these other platforms where it's mostly the influencer and other content where you're not communicating with friends, where even if you are, it's not in real time. So with gaming, I think it is, a little bit better, but you have to qualify that with a couple things. So one is be aware that kids can communicate with unknown adults through those platforms, like Roblox, for example. Sometimes Minecraft. I mean, you have to look into putting the kid safe settings on those. Plus, those games are very engaging, so put a time limit on them. And, exactly what that time limit should be, I would say no more than an hour on weekdays and probably no more than 2 hours on weekends. It may and it depends a little bit more, I'm not a huge fan of it depends rules, in the book, it's 10 rules and they pretty much apply to everybody. Exact time limits are a little bit harder. For gaming, for my kids, it's half an hour on the weekdays and 1 hour, on the weekends. But if I felt like that was their main form of social interaction, I might up it a little bit, but not much, because there are kids who will spend every waking hour playing video games if you don't put limits on it.
I want to share a profile with you and get your reaction to it because I guess I didn't know how big of an issue this was until the summer of 2022. I was on a family vacation and it was outside the United States. And there was an 18-year-old girl there and she's a family friend and I was chatting with her and she spent a lot of time on her phone. And I asked her what she was doing. She said, "Oh, I'm watching TikTok videos and I'm on the Instagram." And I said, How much time do you spend on it?" And she said, "Oh, I don't know." And I said, "Well, there's a setting there. Let's take a look." And she works, she had a job, probably 30 hours a week or so. She spent 48 hours the previous week on social media, and that was just social media, that wasn't her phone, that was just social
Right.
media, TikTok
Right.
and Instagram, and I'm assuming you're not surprised by that.
I wish I was, but yeah, what does that work out to you? So 48 hours in 1 week. So if that was just, weekdays, that'd be 8 hours a day. So that's about 7. Yeah, that's unfortunately not that unusual.
And it was very passive, as you were saying, so she was just liking the videos, just like, and I said,
Mhm.
"Well, why are you liking that?" And she said, "Well, I don't know," and it just became
Mhm.
a routine. It was a very mindless activity. So I was that's when I was like, "Oh, wow, because she was a charming girl, when she would talk with her cousins, she would really get engaged, but it was
Mhm.
so difficult
Mhm.
to pull her away from this, 4 by 3 inch device or tiny, tiny device." You've written this book, 10 Rules. What are the rules that you advise for parents and educators to protect young people from these technology dangers?
Yeah. So I'll start with the last one since we're also, speaking to educators, which is no phones during the school day, bell to bell. So not just classroom by classroom and not you can use it on breaks, but the whole school day. So that accomplishes that they are going to be talking to each other at lunch and during breaks. It's that they get a 6.5 hour break from their phone, learn how to live and think without their phone, and then all the benefits for their paying more attention in class and learning, that it's not piecemeal from one classroom to another where you have the cool teacher who lets you be on your phone and then the not cool teacher who doesn't. And then like some of my kids' teachers are like, "Oh, you can use your phone when you're done with your work," which is like my bane of my existence. Like, really? And then they're gonna rush through their work, not do a good job, and then be on their phone. Then there's all the discipline issues of kids filming each other, sometimes in vulnerable situations in locker rooms or bathrooms without their permission. I found a couple of reports that I ended up putting in the books. I thought they were so impressive of the principals who have put those policies into place of no phones during the school day, bell to bell, and seen enormous improvements in discipline issues. They go way, way down when they have because I think that's sometimes a fear that principals have. Like, we'll put that policy in place, we're gonna be fighting about the phones all day. But like a lot of the other rules in the book that are more for parents works the same. If you have a simple, straightforward rule, it's actually easier to enforce than the piecemeal or it depends or classroom to classroom. During the day, bell to bell, that's it, is much easier to enforce actually.
The first place we'll start is phone-free schools, bell to bell, which I really like. Take all the gray out of it. No phones here. Where should parents start?
So for parents, I think the most important rule is no electronic devices in the bedroom overnight. And that one is good for people of all ages. So it's good for you as well as being good for your kids. And it's for a number of reasons. So really, it's just know, from so much research how important sleep is and how much technology interferes with it. And one of the stats in the book, I think I opened the chapter with this, is a study from Common Sense Media, who does some really, really great research with teenagers. And they tracked 11 to 17-year-olds' phone use, and they found 6 out of 10 used their phone at least once between midnight and 5 a.m. on school nights.
Unbelievable.
So the majority. Isn't that unbelievable? So I think a lot of parents are like, "Oh, again, it's a good kid, they won't do it." Yeah, it's too tempting. It's too tempting. So just get it physically out of the bedroom, not just off. Yes, put the parental controls on it so, on weeknights when they're supposed to be home, it shuts off at bedtime. Yes, do that, but also get it physically out of the bedroom. So on a charger, away from the bedrooms. Put it in a lockbox if you have to, if your kid is especially sneaky.
What's the earliest a teen should get a smartphone?
So the rule in our house is you get your first smartphone, meaning an internet-enabled phone, when you get your driver's license. So before that, my kids have had either flip phones or phones designed for kids, like Gab or TrueMe or Pinwheel. But it's not just 16. It's 16 and you have a driver's license. So my middle one just turned 16. And we had this conversation a couple months ago. She said, I really, really, I'm the only one, the whole I'm the only one, discussion, which many parents have had. I'm the only one who doesn't have a smartphone. Can I get it when I turn 16? Or does it have to be with the driver's license? I said, no, it's got to be with the driver's license. And that accomplishes a couple of goals. So, first, it puts it off even longer, which let's do that. Second, then it's time to this independence because really, really, they don't really need a phone until they're driving. Now, I know in a big city where they're getting around on public transportation, this might be different, but in most areas of the country, including where I live, more of a car culture, more suburban, you don't really need it until that point. Then you can get the Maps app, then if something happens, you have internet, all that kinda stuff. You don't really need it until then. Plus, you have that independence of being able to drive. Then you don't ever have to have the choice of, "Oh, mom and dad are busy, they can't drive me to my friend's house, so let's, use Snapchat instead."
I grew up in a very rural area, a mining town, and to me,
In the
well, I'm
north?
I'm I'm a little bit older than you are. I'm a few years older than you are, but to me, the driver's license was the key to freedom, and I tell
Yes.
people that, you know, I'm not a social psychologist, but I tell people that to me, when I look at teens, the phone is the driver's license of
Mm.
today's teens. Like, that's the true access to the world, and because when I got my driver's license, I could go to Virginia, Minnesota, or drive down to Duluth, and you get exposure to different things, but once they get that phone and access to the internet, unrestricted access to the internet, oh boy, their worlds can open up.
But it's not the same, is the thing.
No,
I
no,
think
no,
that's
no.
that's the that's the problem that you're right, that is like the turning point, but what the world that opens up to them is, funhouse mirror. It's not reality, it's not
Yes,
independence,
yes.
it's to an extent, it's some information. I mean, it's not all bad, there's some good things out of it, but a lot of it is a lot of junk, and a lot of time wasting, and it's not and for communication with other people, it is a pale shadow compared to actually being in the same room with somebody else.
Given the work that you do and this book that you've written, do you see a ton of value with social media?
No. I mean, I see some value for adults. Even then, though, it's tough for adults to use it for what it's good for and then get out because of the algorithms involved.
Fast forward 5, 10 years from now, and thinking of today's teens, how are they going to be able to discern what's real and what's not? And how are they going to be able to trust? Because I have great concerns over what's on social media and the inability to distinguish between this being real and this being AI created.
Absolutely, and I think that that's gonna continue, and that's gonna get worse, and the thing I am the most concerned about right now, the new thing I'm concerned about is AI boyfriends and girlfriends.
Yes, I'm glad you brought this up because
Yeah,
the interview previous to you is with Mandy McLean. I don't know if you know who she is, but she's been studying AI companions and AI characters, and I really didn't know what they were. So maybe that's a place to start with you is describe what an AI companion or an AI boyfriend or girlfriend is.
yeah. So most people have heard of like Chat GPT, and Chat GPT can have these conversations, but there's also apps that are more specifically designed to be companion apps or and I know this from looking at the banned apps list on my children's phones. There are ones that are like AI sexy chat and there's AI girlfriend and things like that. And they all have, the expected, cartoon pornographic picture to go along with them. If you hand your 10-year-old a smartphone without new parental controls on it, nothing is preventing them from downloading this or from them having their first, so-called romantic relationship with a chatbot.
Mm,
And there's already been tragic cases of teens taking their own lives after interacting with these bots and developing so-called relationships with them. And then they're very affirming. And so there was a horrible case where a teen took his own life because I think it was ChatGPT actually was telling him, "Oh, that noose looks great," because he'll just agree with everything. So that's bad enough that we have these horribly, extreme outcomes. But the everyday outcomes are really scary too of what happens to that child when they grow up and try to have a relationship with a real human being, or even just try to have a friendship with someone who's not going to be affirming all the time and who's not going to be there, telling them that everything they do is great. And, in terms of like the sexy chat ones, who's not going to always want to talk about sex, which is going to be most people. So that's really frightening to me that that's becoming the standard of that's the default for like a first relationship. Ugh,
yeah,
scary.
I agree, and I've been thinking about, given the age of my children, we've had conversations since they knew what a phone was. And that they had classmates who have them. We've been having these conversations. So I was thinking, oh, we're probably going to be okay because they the expectation has been set. So what's next? And I was thinking, oh, it's these AI companions,
Mhm.
AI therapists,
Yes.
and my another issue is yes, they are designed to be sycophants and to agree with
Mhm.
you and to build you up.
Mhm.
But the privacy, there's no privacy. There's no protection of your data. And to think what a company might do or how they might sell that or use that to manipulate you is very, very concerning to me.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's social media works the same way, that you are the product.
Yes.
You sign up for Instagram or Snapchat or TikTok and, it's quote free, but you are paying with your time and attention, possibly your mental health. And the reason you don't have to pay is that you are the product because through the advertising dollars, that's how they're making money. And the longer you spend on it, the more money they make, which is why they have the incentive to keep people on as long as possible. And teens and kids are their best customers because they have the hardest time putting it down. And the companies know this.
What do you want from legislators?
Oh, I have a big wish list. So several state legislatures have already done no phones during the school day bell to bell. Guess New Hampshire has that this year, which is wonderful. And talking to principals, they say that they like that because then it takes the pressure off of them to come up with those policies if the state mandates it. Um, so with social media, right now the minimum age is 13. And even that is not enforced. Even though that's way too low, 13 was set as the age of so-called internet adulthood in 1998 at the dawn of the internet. It was a compromise with the tech companies. It was not, any consultation with parents or educators or developmental experts, like none of whom would ever say 13, puberty, middle school, that's the best time to introduce social media. Like no one would ever say that. That is where it got set. Not even that is verified.
Right.
And so I would like as what I would love is what Australia is doing. They raised the minimum age for social media to 16 and they're going to require age be verified. So that's my pipe dream is that we could get that in the US. I would love that.
How will they verify the age?
There's many ways. So there are so many companies and so many ways to verify age that they have their own trade association now.
Hmm.
So there's various AI that will do it. There's all kinds of ways to do it. And it can be done while opening the account, not every time you log in. So it doesn't have to be something that is tremendously intrusive. Um, I would actually even think it was tremendous progress if the companies would just enforce the existing age minimum of 13. Even that would be progress to keep 12 and unders off of Instagram and TikTok and Snapchat. That'd be great.
When do you recommend that we talk to children about porn and school shootings and some real sensitive topics? I'm asking for personal reasons. I'm stuck with this. We had the very tragic school shooting a few weeks ago in Minneapolis,
Right.
and my kids don't know about it yet, just simply because they were starting school the following week, and
Hmm.
I just didn't want them to be scared. So I'm looking for some
Yeah.
guidance there.
Yeah. Well, in terms of the stuff online, in the first chapter of the book, I have 7 conversations you should have with your kids before they start accessing the internet on their own. And so that's going to be close to your oldest age, sometime around 9 or 10 to just start having those conversations about never, ever, ever send anyone a nude picture of yourself is number one, for example. Um, and information that you should never give to someone online. It's just things like that because by middle school, so about 11, they'll often get a school laptop and then have some access to the internet. A lot of kids get a phone at that age, even though that is too young. But to have those conversations and to start having those conversations young. The school shooting one, that one's out of my wheelhouse.
Yeah. It's probably gonna be forced upon us,
Yeah,
simply because they're gonna find out about it, and we're going to have to address it at some point, but for
yeah,
now, I've just chosen to kick the can down the road because I just don't want them to be scared,
yeah,
and, I feel like a lot of in a lot of ways, these young people have been robbed of some innocence. And even one of the things that you talk about is giving kids real world freedom, and that's been taken away, and I feel that's been unfair as well.
yeah. So that's another piece. It's not just the technology, it's also we want to give kids back a childhood, give teens back an adolescence where they're doing the things that they really should be doing at those ages. Playing outside and, beyond a certain age, playing outside by themselves, walking or biking to school by themselves. Um, for teens, getting that driver's license, going out with their friends. And kids and teens are not doing those things as much as they used to. And some of that is just from taking longer to grow up. Some of it is from overprotection because just as a society, we have vastly underprotected kids in the online environment and we have overprotected them in the physical environment. We need to bring those two back into balance because those things in the physical environment are really important for development and independence and learning how to make decisions on your own.
What can you teach us about happiness? And have you tracked happiness over time, particularly among teenagers?
I have. There's couple of big surveys that have asked about happiness and life satisfaction, and the trends follow a really interesting pattern. So let's just take it from the early 90s when it was Gen Xers who were teenagers. Happiness actually increased among teens between the early 90s and the early 2010s.
Hmm.
And then it just fell off a cliff after that and wiped out all the gains since the 1990s. So just as depression went up after about 2011 or 2012, happiness went down. One graph that I made really early on for my book iGen, which came out in 2017, was looking at the ways teens spend their time and then how that was associated with their level of happiness. And it turned out pretty much every activity that involved a screen was linked to less happiness, and thus more unhappiness. Almost every activity that did not involve a screen, so reading, working, spending time with friends, attending religious services, getting enough sleep, all of those went the other direction. The kids who spent more time on it were happier.
Hmm.
So that pattern was so stark. And this was a while ago when my kids were younger. After I made that graph, I pushed my chair away from my desk, got up, grabbed my kids' Kindle Fires, and shoved them into the back of a dresser. Pretty much never to be seen again. And I was actually kind of surprised. It took my oldest, who was maybe 9 at the time, a few days to say, "Hey, where'd my Kindle Fire go?" And I was just like, "Oh, we're not going to use it anymore." And we'd lock those things down. They were only allowed an hour of video, and then they had unlimited time reading. But they didn't use it to read. They watched the hour of video, and then it was like a brick to them. So when I thought about that and I looked at that graph, I was like, "Well, that's an easy one." Then they have an hour back, to do other things.
Yeah. Yeah. Any final advice to educators or parents to help protect their kids from technology?
So I always want to acknowledge that this is not easy. Being a parent is hard, being an educator is hard. A lot of people these days with kids and technology feel like they're playing whack-a-mole. They figured out one device and then another device pops up. I've been there. I've absolutely been there. It is a really hard thing now with there being so little regulation, with there's just not as much of like a universal solution as there should be for these things. We should keep kids off social media until they're about 16. You know, it'd be great if every school had no phones during the school day, bell to bell, so it didn't have to be more piecemeal. So it is hard. Educators are in a tough position, parents are in a tough position, but you can do a lot of good, even if it's not perfect. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Do what you can, and you will see benefits.
Dr. Twenge, thank you for the work that you do, and thank you for being a genius.
Thank you for having me on.